So now we come to part 3 of the video series on Portrait of the Artist as a Young Man by James Joyce. Stephen is now an adolescent and he has fallen into a variety of sins. And he has now confessed and he's feeling guilty about it after the retreat, 3-day retreat at Belvedere. After the confession, Stephen becomes fanatically pious and rededicated himself to a life without sin. He disciplined his senses and resigned himself to a life of resolute piety, vowing to adhere to the rituals of Catholicism. He began to attend Mass every day, say rosaries on the beads that he began to carry with him, and pray daily to be purged of the 7 deadly sins. He began to lead a life of self-discipline. And in order to prove the sincerity of his renewed dedication to God, he also began a series of mortifications of the flesh. He woke up too early, endured the raw, cold morning, punished himself, and even tried to sleep without moving in bed. And he feels not only happy about it, but also irritable. Interestingly, the more he tries to control his senses, he yearns for independence. However much he tries to control himself, old feelings like anger and desire began to creep in. He began to doubt whether he is being sincere in his prayers and fasting. He fears that his soul may have fallen without his knowledge. He began doubting more and more. He wonders whether his confession at Christ Church Street was really genuine. And then he tells himself, I have amended my life, have I not? That is a very famous line with which one section ends. And looking at this self-disciplined young man, the school director, who is a priest, decides to talk to him. He takes notice of Stephen's fervent piety. And like it always happens in schools run by priests or nuns, there is a discussion or suggestion made to Stephen that he should join the religious order, the religious vocation. So Stephen is called for a meeting with the school director. At the meeting, the school director's face is symbolically in shadow, showing probably the underlying darkness. Until then, Stephen never doubted the fathers. And this father, who talks to him about priesthood, is initially described as a saintly icon of religious worship. He's like a saint. And this is satirical because during the conversation, this image is reversed. It becomes clear to Stephen that the school director's speech is worldly and manipulative. He is not the great religious man that Stephen thought he is. What happens is, instead of talking about profound religious matters, the priest is telling Stephen about the pride and power involved in priesthood. I will read from the novel. To receive that call, Stephen, said the priest, is the greatest honor that the God Almighty can bestow upon a man. No king or emperor on this earth has the power of the priest of God. So, why you should be a priest is because it gives you power. No angel or archangel in heaven, no saint, not even the Blessed Virgin herself has the power of a priest of God. How evil. Is that why you become a priest? The power of the keys, the power to bind and to loose from sin, the power of exorcism, the power to cast out from the creatures of God the evil powers that have power over them. The power, the authority to make the great God of heaven come down upon the altar. Wow! Can you believe that? He says the priest has the power to make God come down here. It is our turn to laugh. God, this is so bad. The power, the authority to make the great God of heaven come down upon the altar and take the form of bread and wine. What an awful power, Stephen. That moment when the school director thought that he has enticed Stephen by talking about the power of the priest, in that moment, probably Stephen felt, yeah, I don't want to be the priest. I don't want to be a priest. I read, a flame began to flutter again on Stephen's cheek as he heard in this proud address an echo of his own proud musings. How often had he seen himself as a priest, wielding calmly and humbly the awful power of which angels and saints stood in reverence? His soul had loved to muse in secret on this desire. He had seen himself a young and silent-mannered priest entering a confessional swiftly, ascending the altar steps, incensing, genuflecting, accomplishing the vague acts of the priesthood which pleased him by reason of their semblance of reality and of their distance from it. He himself was guilty of that pride. And the school director and Stephen part with a handshake, agreeing that they will pray for about Stephen's decision. And then it suddenly dawns on Stephen the grim realities of clerical life. Is this what I want? Is this the hypocritical life that I want? The control life of apparent control that I want? Or do I want to be free? Do I want to be human? He is troubled and he is taking a walk home. At that time, taking a walk home, he famously crosses a bridge over the Tolka River. Remember that happens here. He takes a walk over the Tolka River. This crossing the bridge over Tolka is a very important symbol. He is crossing from adolescence to maturity to adulthood. And after this, he the entire, all the pages, all these scenes are full of his thoughts, his mental musings. It is stream of consciousness. And then he reaches a by lane. He reaches a lane, and in that lane, he gets an epiphanic moment. So at first, he is confused. Let me read 2 passages. At first, he is confused about the prospects of priesthood, and then he walks in a lane. Some instinct waking at these memories, the memories of Clongowies, the memories of priestly life and education, stronger than education or piety, quickened within him at every near approach to that life. To that priestly life, when he approached, there are memories that disturb him. And in an instinct subtle and hostile, and armed him against acquiescence. The chill and order of life repelled him. He saw himself rising in the cold of the morning and filing down with the others to early mass and trying vainly to struggle with his prayers against the fainting sickness of his stomach. Do you want to do that, Stephen? And then he's continuing his walk. Then, bending to the left, he followed the lane which led up to his house. The faint, sour stink of rotted cabbages came down towards him. from the kitchen gardens on the rising ground above the river. He gets the smell of rotten cabbages, overripe cabbages, and he realizes that it is this mess, this physicality of life that he prefers to the stale odor of the Clongowese halls. I read, he smiled to think that it was this disorder, the misrule and confusion of his father's house, and the stagnation of vegetable life, which was to win the day of his soul. This is what he wanted. And with that, he completely gives up the idea of priesthood. He's not free yet, though. His mind is still overburdened. He reaches his house and goes inside. His father and mother were not there, and his brothers and sisters were there. He sat near them at the table and asked where his father and mother were. One answered, "Gone borrow, to borrow, look borrow, at borrow, a borrow, house borrow." Children's talk. To every word he is adding borrow. Gone borrow, to borrow, look borrow, at borrow, a borrow, house borrow. That means gone to look at a house. Oh, Stephen's family is again moving house. They can't afford even this shabby house. A frown of scorn darkened quickly his forehead. Stephen heard this and is not pleased. Why are we on the move again, if that's a fair question? Then his brother is answering, because borrow, the borrow, land borrow, lot borrow, will borrow, put borrow, us borrow, out borrow. That means because the landlord will put us out. He'll throw us out. We have not been paying rent. Stephen is overburdened by life, by his family, by this mess of life. And after this, some years have passed. After this, Stephen is about to enter university. But he is also again restless. One day he was walking down to the ocean, sea, and he saw some of his friends bathing there. Their naked bodies and their merrymaking in the water. Stephen feels different. Hello, Stephanos. Here comes the Daedalus. This is how his friends are welcoming him. Stephanos means one crowned with wreaths. And Daedalus is the fabulous artificer. They are making fun of him in a very friendly way. As he looks at them, Stephen thinks how characterless they looked. Well, that shows pride in Stephen. But that pride is also part of his identity. That is what makes him realize his identity as an artist later. They are all bantering, and Stephen is feeling superior to them. And when they call out his name, as never before, his strange name seemed to him like a prophecy. It gives him the idea that he can escape. He imagines himself escaping. Like Daedalus, who made a pair of wings to escape from his prison. Let me read from the book. What did it mean? It's like an epiphany. When he hears his name called out, now at the name of the fabulous artificer, he seemed to hear the noise of dim waves and to see a winged form flying above the waves and slowly climbing the air. He's actually seeing it in front of him. What did it mean? Was it a quaint device opening a page of some medieval book of prophecies and symbols? A hawk-like man flying sunward above the sea. A prophecy of the end he had been born to serve and had been following through the mists of childhood and boyhood. a symbol of the artist forging anew in his workshop out of the sluggish matter of the earth, a new, soaring, impalpable, imperishable being. His heart trembled. His breath came faster, and a wild spirit passed over his limbs as though he was soaring sunward. He's getting that experience. This is epiphany. Epiphany is a hallucination. It is a feeling that you get that transports you beyond yourself. His heart trembled in an ecstasy of fear, and his soul was in flight. His soul was soaring in an air beyond the world, and the body he knew was purified in a breath and delivered of incertitude and made radiant and commingled with the element of the spirit. His throat ached with a desire to cry aloud. The cry of a hawk or eagle on high, to cry piercingly of his deliverance to the winds. This was the call of life to his soul, not the dull, gross voice of the world of duties and despair, not the inhuman voice that had called him to the pale service of the altar. That is not the cry. Not the cry to duties of the family, not the cry to the service of the altar. An instant of wild flight had delivered him, and the cry of triumph, which his lips withheld, cleft his brain. The cry of his soul to escape. Beautiful, that epiphany. At that time, he is walking away. There is a rivulet on the beach. And he sees there, as he wades through the rivulet, he sees a girl wading in that stream. A girl stood before him in midstream, alone and still, gazing out to sea. She seemed like one whom magic had changed into the likeness of a strange and beautiful seabird. He is comparing that girl to a seabird. Her long, slender, bare legs were delicate as a crane's, and pure, save where an emerald trail of seaweed had fashioned itself as a sign upon the flesh. Her thighs, fuller and soft-hued as ivory. Remember, Aileen's hands were also like tower of ivory. Were bared almost to the hips, where the white fringes of her drawers were like feathering of soft white down. Her slate blue skirts were kilted boldly about her waist and dovetailed behind her. Her bosom was as a bird's, soft and slight and soft as the breast of some dark-plumaged dove. She is like a seabird. But her long, fair hair was girlish and touched with the wonder of mortal beauty, her face. She was alone and still, gazing out to sea, and when she felt his presence and the worship of his eyes, her eyes turned to him in quiet sufferance of his gaze, without shame or wantonness. Beautiful. Long she suffered his gaze, and then quietly withdrew her eyes from his, and bent them down towards the stream, gently stirring the water with her foot hither and thither. Heavenly God, cried Stephen's soul in an outburst of profane joy. This joy is profane, looking at a girl and her beauty. But heavenly God, this is what I want. He turned away from her suddenly and set off across the strand. His cheeks were aflame, his body was aglow, his limbs were trembling. On and on and on and on he strode, far out over the sands, singing wildly to the sea, crying to greet the advent of the life that had cried to him. He has just got a call from life itself, and he is responding to it. He has decided this is a turning point in his life. This epiphanic image of the girl wading in water, the beauty of life, the attachment that he feels to the beauties of life. This is the climax of the novel. This is the moment when he realizes his destiny to become an artist, to be attached to the impurities of this life, to the beauties of this life. Her image had passed into his soul forever. And no word had broken the holy silence of his ecstasy. No word was spoken. No word had broken the holy silence of his ecstasy. Her eyes had called him, and his soul had leapt at the call, had leaped at the call. To live, to err, to fall, to triumph, to recreate life out of life. That is what he wants. A wild angel had appeared to him, the angel of mortal youth and beauty, an envoy from the fair courts of life, to throw open before him in an instant of ecstasy the gates of all the ways of error and glory. On and on and on and on. How far had he walked? What hour was it? He lost count, because his life has changed. He has decided. He has come to realize what life means to him. He has come to realize what his destiny is. End of chapter 4. It is perhaps the most intense chapter in this novel. So he has decided to turn to aesthetics. And then we have the final and the longest chapter of the novel. Chapter 5. After a few years, one morning, Stephen is looking through pawn tickets. His family is in very poor financial condition now. And they have been buying groceries and things using pawn tickets. That day, Stephen is sitting there looking through pawn tickets, and his mother is saying that he is very dirty and she is helping him to wash and asking him not to be late to university. His father is asking one of his siblings, "Is your lazy bitch of a brother out yet?" He's calling Stephen a lazy bitch. And Stephen says he must be seriously confused about gender to think that bitch is male. He has a curious idea of genders if he thinks bitch is masculine, says Stephen. And Stephen then goes out, gets ready and goes out and reaches the university. The language of narration is very poetic and philosophical. The baby talk with which the novel began has completely changed now. And you are with Stephen that day as he attends to lectures. He is finding the lectures quite boring because he is a man of his own mind. He's an artist. He is introverted. And you also meet his you find that he can't concentrate on an English literature lecture. And then you meet his friends. You meet Cranley, one of Stephen's best friends. There is Lynch, who listens to Stephen's developing theory of aesthetics. This whole chapter, long chapter that is, contains a long section on Stephen's discussion of aesthetics with Lynch. He has derived his ideas from Aristotle and Thomas Aquinas. And he talks to Lynch about it. These ideas are still forming. And this section of aesthetic theory can be contrasted with Father Arnold's religious theory or sermon on hell. That was also very long. And the beauty of Stephen's freedom, free thinking, questioning is contrasted with the conformity and strict austerity of Father Arnold's speech. Now, when Stephen is talking to Lynch, Lynch does not understand much of it. Lynch is responding in a very flat or insipid or mundane manner. I am reminded of how in Hamlet gives the lecture, "What a piece of work is man," a very famous philosophical, humanistic explosion of ideas on mankind. And immediately after Hamlet finishes that speech, in that play, Rosencrantz replies with a flat, insipid, mundane observation. "There was no such stuff in my thoughts," he says. There was no such stuff in my thoughts. Like that, when Stephen talks to Lynch, he says, "Aristotle has not defined pity and terror. I have." And he starts talking about it. Then Lynch immediately interrupts and says, "Stop, I won't listen, I'm sick. I was out last night on a yellow drunk with Horan and Goggins." He is talking about very mundane realities of life, like drinking and falling ill. And then Stephen begins to talk to Lynch. He talks about, at first, the feelings of pity and terror. He goes on to define pity and terror and says that both pity and terror arrest the mind. That is the word he uses, arrest. Pity is about the sufferer. Pity is related to the person who suffers, while terror is about the cause of the suffering. He says people die in street accidents, but dying in an accident cannot be called tragic because these deaths are remote from pity and terror. The tragic emotion, what happens in tragedy, is both evocation of both terror and pity. It is like a face looking two ways. But the word arrest shows that tragic emotion is static. It is static. Whereas the incitement of desire, exciting desire or loathing, etc., are defined by Stephen as kinetic. Pity and horror and tragedy are all static, and desire, loathing, these are kinetic. Desire wants us to possess something, right? We desire to possess something. Loathing leads us to abandon something or give up something. Loathing, because of desire, we move away from something. Because of loathing, we move away from something. Desire and loathing are related. At first, Stephen desired sex, and then he loathed it. However, the aesthetic emotion is static. Tragedy is static. And with the aesthetic emotion, the mind is raised above the kinetic feelings of desire and loathing. It means that great art stands separate from society and life. Kinetic art is bad, but great art that is static stands away from society. So here Stephen is saying something like art for art's sake. Art as separate from society. Art that should be formalist. Probably James Joyce is linking Stephen's ideas to those of Oscar Wilde. Oscar Wilde also believed had similar beliefs on art. When Stephen rejects desire and loathing, he is rejecting both didactic art and pornographic art. But there are some gray areas. Everything is not very clear. And then Stephen goes on to talk about beauty. Of course, beauty is there in all art. Beauty, when it is expressed by an artist, is not a physical sensation and it is not kinetic. Beauty, when it is expressed by an artist, induces aesthetic emotion, and it is related to stasis, not kinesis. He is relating all this to Aristotle and Aquinas, and he also quotes lines from Aristotle and Aquinas when he says all these things. He talks about how beauty is beheld by the imagination and how it is related to truth. Truth and beauty, that idea he discusses. Truth has to deal with intellect, while beauty deals with imagination. Because imagination is different from people to people, a beautiful thing may not be beautiful in the eye of all beholders. Some people will look at something and think it is beautiful. For other people, it may not be beautiful. After Stephen talks about such ideas, you should realize that it is related to the aesthetic ideas that are discussed in Joyce's Ulysses or D.H. Lawrence's Lady Chatterley's Lover. These are all related to modernism. Stephen also goes on to talk about what is universal beauty, universal appeal of beauty. If any work of art has wholeness, harmony, and radiance, these are words that he has used. Wholeness, he uses the Latin words for these actually. If any work of art has wholeness, harmony, and radiance, it will universally appear to everyone as beautiful. The supreme quality of the thing is realized by the artist when he applies his imagination to it. And he says that it works differently in different forms of art. There are the lyrical forms of art, there are the epic forms of art, and the dramatic forms of art. Lyrical, epic, and dramatic. And in lyric, of course, there are emotions, feelings, music, etc. In epic, there is heroic action, immensity or vastness, etc. In dramatic art, there is, of course, action on stage. We know that already. And after talking about the different kinds of art, he talks about the artist. That is a very famous idea that he gives, which is related to T.S. Eliot's idea of impersonality. Stephen talks about the artist as impersonal and objective. Just like T.S. Eliot says that art should not be an expression of the personality or emotions of the artist, Stephen Dedalus says the personality of the artist refines itself out of existence, impersonalizes itself. I will quote a very famous passage. The artist, like the God of creation, remains within or behind or beyond or above his handiwork, invisible, refined out of existence, indifferent, paring his fingernails. He will create the work of art and stand apart from the work of art, paring his fingernails as if he doesn't care. This is impersonality. So I repeat once again. The artist, like the God of creation, remains within or behind or beyond or above his handiwork, invisible, refined out of existence, indifferent, paring his fingernails. Beautiful. There I will put an end to the discussion of aesthetic theories by Stephen. Let us look at his other friends. Matt Davin is a simple peasant boy who loves Ireland. He is a nationalist, but Stephen has no longer any interest in Irish nationalism. Temple is actually a pretentious boy, but he admires Stephen secretly. McCann is a boy who tells Stephen that he is antisocial and anti-democratic because Stephen refuses to sign a petition for world peace, for universal peace. You see, Stephen is different. At that time, when in these university days, W.B. Yeats's famous play, the Countess Kathleen, was being enacted. And people found it unpatriotic and anti-national. Stephen doesn't. Stephen doesn't join the mainstream society in attacking W.B. Yeats's play. And he also has no interest in signing a petition for universal peace. He realizes that it is not going to bring universal peace. He is different. He doesn't think like everybody else. And we move on. Stephen, at this time, he is almost sure of what he's going to do with life. And he sees Emma. But like always, he is speechless. He is unable to talk to her. And however, finally, he sits down and is able to write a poem for her. 2EC, remember? He writes a poem for her. And there is a very famous epiphanic moment when Stephen sits on the library steps, dreamily watching the birds flying through the air, which reminds him of Daedalus. I will read that famous passage. It is a very famous passage from the novel, when he sits on the library steps and sees the birds in the air. What birds were they? He stood on the steps of the library to look at them, leaning wearily on his ash plant. They flew round and round the jutting shoulder of a house in Molesworth Street. The air of the late March evening made clear their flight. Their dark, darting, quivering bodies flying clearly against the sky, as against a limp-hung cloth of smoky, tenuous blue. He watched their flight, bird after bird. A dark flash, a swerve, a flutter of wings. He tried to count them before all their darting, quivering bodies passed. 6, 10, 11, and wondered, were they odd or even in number? 12, 13. For 2 came wheeling down from the upper sky. They were flying high and low, but ever round and round in straight and curving lines, and ever flying from left to right, circling about a temple of air. He listened to the cries. Like the squeak of mice behind the wainscot, a shrill twofold note. But the notes were long and shrill and whirring, unlike the cry of vermin. Falling a third or a fourth, and trilled as the flying beaks clove the air. Their cry was shrill and clear and fine and falling like threads of silken light unwound from whirring spools. Magnificent description. Language dripping with sensations and meanings. That day, Stephen talks to Cranley, his best friend, about Easter rituals. He does not believe in Easter or religious rituals anymore. His mother wants him to go home and do his Easter duty, but he cannot compromise just to please his mother. with Cranley. There is a long talk about religion, politics, family, Ireland. Cranley does not agree. Cranley thinks he should go home, but talking to Cranley, Stephen realizes that he does not want to do what Cranley wants him to do. He does not want to do what his mother wants him to do. He recognizes his need to be independent. I read, I will not serve that in which I no longer believe, whether it call itself my home, my fatherland, or my church. He wants to leave his house, his family, his fatherland, his church. And he has now decided. There is no confusion. The next section in the novel, it is towards the end of the novel, are his diary entries in his final days in Ireland before he leaves Ireland. The first entry is on March 20th. March 20. Long talk with Cranley on the subject of my revolt. He had his grand manner on, I supple and suave. Attacked me on the score of love for one's mother. Tried to imagine his mother. Cannot. Told me once in a moment of thoughtlessness his father was 61 when he was born. Can see him. Strong farmer type. Pepper and salt suit, square feet, unkempt, grizzled beard. Probably attends coursing matches. Pays his dues regularly but not plentifully to Father Dyer of Larras, etc. And then the next diary entry is March 21 morning, then March 21 night, March 22, March 23, March 24. Like that he goes on. And on April 15, he spoke to Emma. Met her today point blank at Grafton Street. The crowd brought us together. We both stopped. She asked me why I never came. Said she had heard all sorts of stories about me. This was only to gain time. Asked me was I writing poems? About whom, I asked her. This confused her more, and I felt sorry and mean. Turned off that valve at once and opened the spiritual, heroic refrigerating apparatus invented and patented in all countries by Dante Alighieri. The diary entries end on April 27. The last entry says, Old father, old artificer, stand me now and ever in good stead. He is praying to Daedalus, and thus Daedalus, the mythical Daedalus that is, like Daedalus, he makes his way out of the trap of Ireland. Thus the novel ends. Now a quick look at the structure of the novel. Are you ready? There are 5 chapters, as you know. Chapters 1 and 2 is about the awakening of religious doubt and sexual desire. Remember? From infancy and childhood, he grows up and begins to doubt religion. Sexual desire is aroused, culminating in carnal sin at the age of 16. So here, you see his infancy, and he is increasingly doubting, and also sexuality is awakened. And at this point, when the chapter 2 ends, he has had his first sexual encounter with a prostitute. So this section is sexual. Chapters 3 and 4 are about the cycle of sin and repentance leading to the revelation of his decision about his life. He is very religious at this part, and then he is confused whether to join priesthood, and then he gives up priesthood. So his engagement with religion, his exploration of religion, and finally his rejection of religion, ending the religious part, this is ending with the image of the girl wading in the stream. And the last part is his aesthetic philosophy, his beginning of his life as an artist. In the beginning, you saw his bonding with his father. And this bonding with his father, weekend, he began to feel alienated from his father. And finally, the novel ends with his break with his mother. He is refusing to please his mother. So this is how a child develops into an artist. There is like a curve here. In James Joyce's own words, this is the curve of an emotion. And this is the birth of an artist. Not a mature artist as a young man. This is the birth of an artist. This is the birth of a soul that you see here. And these emotions, sexual and religious emotions, are both kinetic. Remember his aesthetic theory? The sexual and religious emotions are both kinetic, whereas the aesthetic emotion is static.
UK trip drive we saved, remember, in the drive.
The aesthetic emotion is static. And the sexual and religious emotions are kinetic. Now, let us see what happens. The setting. Chapter 1 is set in Clongovis, home and Clongovis. Chapters 2, 3, 4 are set in Belvedere. And chapter 5 in University College. University College relates to the aesthetic. Clongovis is childhood. You see his infancy, school years, playground, classroom, dormitory, infirmary. But remember, these are all disconnected and with gaps. There is no connection here. That disconnection, that fragmentation is very important. And in his adolescence, we see him beginning to appreciate beauty, both illicit beauty and mysterious beauty. Not regular, sanctioned beauty. And then he moves to remorse. And then there is a turning point in his spiritual life in chapter 4 when he accepts the life of the senses. In chapter 4, with the image of the waiting girl, he comes to fully accept the life of creativity and the senses. And in the last part, there is rebellion against the mainstream. So what do you mean by aesthetic? He stops searching outside himself and turns within. The answers to his problems are all within. That is the meaning of the aesthetic and the rebellion against the mainstream. Now, let us come to the major symbols and motifs. A very important symbol from the beginning is rose. You remember the wild rose in the song that he was singing. Rose is a flower that blossoms at crucial stages of Daedalus' experience. His experiences with women, religion, and art are signaled by roses at many points in the novel. The roses in the novel signal changes in his attitudes and reactions in his journey to maturity. From sensual to spiritual love, experience of beauty. These are all related to Stephen's experience of roses. Remember, at the beginning itself, it was a green rose that he was singing. That the infant Stephen, by mistake, said green rose. That signals Ireland, of course, green for Ireland. And the wild rose and the green rose also signal his rebellion. It is Stephen's unique identity, unique perception that it signals. When Stephen fantasizes of Mercedes, he thinks of a rose garden. Catholic purity is sometimes associated with white rose in the novel, and red rose suggests passion of the flesh, and red and white roses suggest the conflict in Stephen's mind. So that is one important symbol. And another symbol is that of water, or wet versus dry sensations. Remember, from the beginning of the novel, sensory details were given. The wetness of passing urine in bed, he discussed at the beginning, remember? And smell, hot versus cold, light versus darkness, that is also related to the motif of eyesight. These sensations also are associated with Stephen's riotous desires and rebellious thoughts and arousal of mature perceptions. When he is embracing the prostitute, he famously talks about her presence as a flood. At the beginning of the novel, when he falls into Clongawee's cesspool, it is like a baptism into the impure adult life. So the standing water of the cesspool, the ocean that fringes the narrative and their life all the time, the description of the word suck, which the lavatory of a hotel where he is staying makes so many, disturbing images of water, suggestive images of water. And also rain. When Stephen is talking about aesthetic philosophy to Lynch, it begins to rain. It is like the heavens are approving of his theories. And wet and dryness are often associated with hot and cold also. He talks about his mother's smell at the beginning as a warm smell. He talks about the mother's warm lap, and also the warmth or the heat of the embrace of the prostitute. Whereas there is a lot of description of coldness related to priestly life and life at Clongawees and Belvedere, cold indifference. Cold is symbolic of lack of emotion or lack of meaning. These are also very important biblical symbols, as you know. Birds certainly is a very important metaphor, as you know, because of the relationship with Daedalus and flying. Images of birds and flight. Many times, many people are compared to birds. Daedalus himself is compared to a hawk-like man. The girl waiting on the beach is compared to a seabird. And Daedalus gets the epiphanic feeling of wanting to fly away from the labyrinth of Ireland when he sees the birds in the sky. So this image of flying is mythically associated with daring and courage and the desire to escape. I'm reminded of Septimus Warren Smith in Mrs. Dalloway, who literally flew down from the window to death. He jumped from the window and killed himself. It was like an escape. He saved himself by killing himself. So it is related to the idea of escape also. This image of the birds is related to the idea of escape. Escape from entrapment and constraint. What Septimus Warren Smith or Stephen Dedalus cannot accept is the possession of the soul, their soul, by religion or society or nation. They want to leave that trap or labyrinth and escape and assert their independence. Catholicism and priests are a very important presence in the novel, of course. Stephen at first took it for granted that the fathers are, and their strictness is okay. It is good. But even from his childhood, Stephen had begun to question. Remember his going to complain against Father Dolan. And associated with priests, he has many unpleasant memories of their hands. The fatty hands with long pointed nails of the father who will do the flogging. Hands of nasty Roch. He had big hands, by the way. He's a bully. He experiences cold a lot through his hands blue with cold. Cold and damp hands of the prefect. He also notices Mr. Casey's hands and Aileen's hands that are like ivory, tower of ivory. The hands motif is there in Thomas Mann, in Buddenbrooks. It is an important modernist technique. Hands are usually unpleasant and are related to the idea of punishment. Many times, hands are related to punishment. And also eyesight sometimes, because beginning when Stephen is a small kid, and when just 3 years old, and he announces that he's going to marry the Protestant girl Aileen, Dante says, the eagles will pull out his eyes. Punishment is related to eyesight. When Stephen suffers from bad eyesight, it is almost like it is a punishment for being what he is. Blindness as punishment is a very Christian idea. Mr. Casey spat tobacco juice into an old woman's eyes, blinding her. He describes that during the Christmas dinner. And it was a very unpleasant memory and story that he tells. And also during that Christmas dinner, Casey himself is blinded by rage. When Stephen breaks his glasses, he's metaphorically blinded. And blinding here means inability to see, inability to learn. It is also an inability to assert himself. So the motives of eyesight and punishment are related throughout the book and are repeatedly appearing throughout the book. It is from the constraints that are symbolized by punishment that he wants to fly away. That is why when his friends call out his name, it looks like a prophecy. Because that is his destiny. To fly away and choose what he wants, art as a destiny. And this is also related to his aesthetic ideas of beauty, sensitivity, and imagination, because that is what he believes as important. That is what he feels as important over all the other constraints of life. And by preferring beauty, sensitivity, and imagination, aesthetic stasis, he is asserting his identity as an artist. The hero is moving from childhood to manhood learning his own destiny as an artist and an exile. He wants to leave, cut his ties with family, religion, and nation, and go into exile. Because that loneliness is his actual power. He was destined to learn his own wisdom apart from others. It's a famous quote from the novel. He was destined to learn his own wisdom apart from others and to learn the wisdom of others himself, wandering among the snares of the world. You see Stephen wandering in the Dublin streets, wandering in the shores of the sea. That wandering is part of his exile. Shedding his loyalties. This also is another very important metaphor in modernism. The artist as exile. I'm reminded of Sons and Lovers. I'm reminded of André Gide's novels like The Immoralist. The artist, like the god of creation, remains within or behind or beyond or above his handiwork. Invisible, refined out of existence, indifferent. See? Paring his fingernails. He should not be immersed in life or in his art. He should stand away, apart, above, separating himself from others. And that is the very essence of modernism, that image of the artist paring his fingernails. So with that, we come to the end of this video series on Portrait of the Artist as a Young Man. I hope you enjoyed it. Thank you.